Hi all, this is Gabrielle. Today I'm going to share with you a watch the process type video to do this scrapbook page using 49 Market's new vintage artistry papers and some Lindy's color and TCW stencil. This one is called Mania. So our first step is going to be prepping our chipboard. Here I'm using Dusty Attic. This one's called Geometric Pattern or Panel, sorry, and I'm also using a film strip and some Elegant Swirls chipboard from Dusty Attic. I'm giving it a coating of some green chalk ink from Prima, and I'm then putting a coating of clear embossing powder on it. Once I've covered each of the pieces, I'm going to hit it with a heat gun, and that's going to give it a nice kind of a sheer, shiny coating. So I've also tried to put captions for the products that I'm using on the screen, as well as listing them underneath in the description area, just so that those who are hearing impaired can also get an understanding of what I'm working with here. But as I said, you can always find the products and links to where you can find them in the area below my video. You just click the see more little gauge there, and then you can see all the products I used. Here I'm using a clear embossing stamp for my title, and I'm going to use an opaque white, I think it's by Stempendous, embossing powder, and again I'm going to hit that with the heat gun, and that's going to give it a beautiful glossy effect. So 49 and Market has come out with some beautiful papers this season, and one of them is, well, it's called Vintage Artistry, and they come in a variety of colors. This one is the Sage collection that I'm using, and I'm using two papers from that collection. One is my top and one as a, a bottom layer that you can peek through. So I'm just trimming the paper right now, and I'm tearing the top paper so that the other one underneath peeks through. You've probably seen me use this tool here. It's the Tim Holtz Edge Distressor. I use this a fair bit on the edges of my photos and papers. Something you'll see me doing quite a bit throughout my projects is distressing the edges, and I also like to use a chalk ink like this Prima branch bark chalk ink. I just like to put that on all the edges and then run my distressing tool over it. It just gives a nice tattered sort of vintage look. This 49 and Market Vintage Artistry collection really has so many cool elements to it. Here I'm using washi tape that's made to coordinate with it. And again, this one is in the sage green color. And all I'm doing is running the tape over the edges, trying to create kind of a framework for my layout. I'm laying some of the tape straight down, but I also do like to tear the tape horizontally so that you get kind of a tattered edge. I don't like things to look too perfect. I like to have that kind of tattered vintage look. Now I'm ready to add some more texture to my layout. So I'm using a Crafter's Workshop stencil called Mania. It's a 12 by 12 sheet. And I'm using some TCW white modeling paste. And I'm just using a palette knife to just run the paste over the stencil. You could also use a credit card for this. And I'm just sort of putting it in the middle area of the layout, underneath the area where my photo is going to go. So I'm just going to have a little bit of that texture area peeking out from behind my photo area. So now that my stenciled area is dry, it's time to apply some color. I'm using Lindy's Ponderosa Pines Olive Magicals. This is such a really cool product. It's just a powder, but it's filled with color and shimmer. As you see here, when I hit it with some water, it really activates those powders. And you can just see it as I continue to hit it with water, the deep, rich golds and greens that are coming out in this color. It's just so beautiful. And I'm just using some water to help fade out the coloring. And I'm doing it in kind of a V, sideways V pattern. Next part, I am going to just prepare what I'm going to put behind my photo, and I'm using these collage pieces from Vintage Artistry. They're very cool. Tickets and all sorts of little cutout pieces that you can use to mat behind your photo. And then the next part of my step is to use a stamp that I designed for 49 and Market called Hibiscus Stamp. This has some interesting script stamp, so now I'm going to use this archival ink. This doesn't get ruined if it gets hit with water, that's why I particularly like this ink. And I'm just going to stamp some scripting around the photos. Why I like to use stamps is because it adds interest in areas that it will show. Sometimes it's really hard when you have photos and things that you cover areas that you like, but here you can put in some scripting around your photos, around the edges of your layout. And now I'm going to use the actual hibiscus flower that is part of this stamp collection. And I think it works really well with this Vintage Artistry paper. That sort of subtle outline of a natural element really works well with this collection. Again, as you can see as I go along, I like to always rub the edges with some of the chalk ink. It just gives it more of a punch. And now I'm figuring out how I'd like to lay out the background pieces of papers behind my photo. One thing I do often like to do is here I've just cut out a piece of cardboard from a cardboard box. It just gives a slight bit of lift to my photo before I mat it onto my pieces behind the photo. It just gives a nice stiffness to it, and it also gives it a little more 3D effect. So now I'm just figuring out where my pieces are going to sit before I actually just glue them down. So once I'm happy with where everything's sitting, I just lifting things up and adding a little glue behind it and setting it. Here I'm adding a little piece of cheesecloth behind it just to add more of that tattered effect. And I'm proceeding here to put some glue on my chipboard pieces, and I'm going to start gluing them down as well. People often ask me how I create a design, and for me it's what gives it a nice flow. In this case here, I'm going with a heavier design on my left side of the page, and I want it to flow to the right to a finer point. And triangular designs are often something that's appealing to the eye, so that's often a design sort of technique I go with. So here now that I've got my elements glued down, I'm going to just finish up with my top layer. I'm tearing another piece, a little V groove, into the bottom of my layout. I'm just going to turn up the edges a bit again for that tattered look. And before I actually glue my top piece down to the behind piece, I'm adding a few more of those little bits of collage pieces. I'm sorry I'm a little bit off the page here. Sometimes when I'm in the zone, I don't notice if my layout slipped up a bit, but it's only momentary. It's only going to be a minute and you'll see the full layout again. So there we are. Now you can see the top area where I tucked some of the collage pieces in, and you can see the finished effect. And now I'm going to continue adding some more of my chipboard pieces. The Elegant Flourishes, I believe that's number 3 by Dusty Attic, and the title piece. And I'm also using some flowers by 49 and Market called Garden Petals in a mint color. Before I lay down the flowers, I'm adding again just a little bit more cheesecloth, continuing with that tattered sort of vintage look. There's another flower package I'm adding in there, and that's 49 and Market Stargazers. Just to give it a little contrast. I don't always like to have exactly the same color, but something that has a nice natural effect that will coordinate nicely with the colors I've chosen. And now I'm just checking where I'm going to put that last piece of chipboard, and before I glue it down, I realize I just want to keep the whole design a little tighter, so I'm moving it up over the photo rather than underneath it. Although now looking at it, I think underneath wouldn't have been too bad either. So I'm a big believer in using old products and things that I have sitting around, and here I have these layered embellishments from an older collection from 49 and Market, but I really love these nests and little bird houses and things like that. So I'm going to use those as little design elements in my layout, and I'm just going to continue tucking these pieces in around the photo area. And so now I've decided I want to add one more layer of color, so I'm using Lindy's Jana's Jade Magicals. And again, these powders are very interesting. They look so light, and then you add a little water and the color just activates beautifully. This has this lovely sort of a green blue, and it just layers beautifully on top of the previous green we used. And so I'm hitting just different areas within the layout, just adding that extra layer of beautiful color. I'm adding it around the photo area. You can add it onto some of the flowers. I'm also going to add just a bit in the top area where there's torn paper, just to give that pretty layered effect. So here we are with that, we're done. Here's just a close-up look at some of the different areas of the layout. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I hope you guys will give it a try as well. As I said, you can find the products I used down below in the description area, and you can find links to where you can find these products. Thanks so much for watching.